I've been listening to your podcast for a while now, and I love the content and the brutal honesty. As an attorney who fought against COVID mandates, I follow a lot of dissenting medical and legal voices and read a lot of great stacks. But your posts and podcasts are amongst my favorite. Thank you for all you do. Legal Glass, thank you so much for that lovely comment, and thank you for subscribing to my Substack. Helgi, hi Ahmed, all the best and lots of love from Iceland. I've been researching all this stuff since around 2009-ish, and I have to say that your podcast is one of the best in the space so far, and I fully support your change to start charging for every episode. I didn't even know that you had a paywall before. If you're ever in Iceland, please come by and visit me in my brewery in Hella. Wow. Well, I hope I do get to visit Iceland, and I'll definitely give you a shout if I come. And Jewel, I believe you're one of the few out there that is not controlled by ego, arrogance, pride, money, or coercion. It is truly humbling to discover how much of our lives are based on lies which we failed to question. And to everyone else who's signed up and become a supporter on Spotify and on Substack, I just want to say thank you so much and welcome. You're part of a wonderful tribe and you keep this show alive, and I'm most grateful. Okay, let's get into the show.
You are listening to the Dr. Malik podcast. This show is 100% independent and fully funded by listeners like yourself. So if you wish to support Ahmed in all that he is doing, then please subscribe to his channel on Spotify or his Substack. Or simply buy him a coffee with a one-off donation, links to which can be found at drmalik.com. Now, let's get on with the show.
Folks, I'm going to talk to you about something that's very close to my heart right now, and that's the whole issue that's been promoted at the latest WEF Davos meeting by Jared Kushner and Trump regarding Gaza. So in this podcast, I'm going to walk you through the following step by step. I'm going to talk about October the 7th and why it cannot be analysed honestly without asking some pretty uncomfortable questions. We're going to talk about how that event became the political and moral pretext for Gaza's destruction, and how Gaza is now being reframed as a redevelopment and investment opportunity, and what the so-called Board of Peace actually is, and what its charter really establishes, who sits on this board and who is deliberately excluded, and why capital and not democracy is the real political power in this model, and how Gaza is being converted into a managed labor zone. And I'm also going to talk about why the Bantustan comparison is not rhetoric but structure. And if you don't know about Bantustan, you'll soon find out about it. And I'm also going to talk about why Gaza is not the exception but the prototype, and therefore why it is worth you listening to this and why it is relevant to your world and my world, wherever we might be. So let's start off by just talking about, what happened. So last week, there was a grand unveiling in Davos at the annual World Economic Forum meeting regarding the new Board of Peace for Gaza and how ethnic cleansing is being reframed as a business model and how Gaza has become a test case for technocratic colonialism. Right, I'm going to go through this very slowly. I'm going to slow things down and explain things clearly. But before I do, I know there's going to be people out there who are going to be very emotionally charged and who will be crying out, well, the savages had it coming. They carried out a terrorist attack, so it's all their fault, and the Palestinians shouldn't have supported Hamas. I stand by Israel. Okay, for those of you who think like that, I'm going to take a small sidetrack here. I'm going to play you videos of Efrak Fenigson, a fellow podcaster and a friend of mine who has spent some time in military intelligence in the IDF. Let's have a listen to what she has to say now.
Apparently, Israeli defense forces that were supposed to be around Gaza were placed around the West Bank because of security concerns, so that the Gaza envelope was left unoccupied with military. They say around 60 to 80% of that area was left without the IDF forces that were supposed to be there. A year ago, there was a military operation in Gaza to prepare for such events, and ongoingly there are trainings for these kind of scenarios. This raises serious questions for me anyway about Israeli intelligence what happened. 2 years ago, there was a successful deployment of underground barriers with sensors to alert exactly on these kind of terrorist breaches. Israel has one of the most advanced and high-tech armies. How come there was zero response to the border and fence breaching? I cannot understand that. Personally, I served in the IDF 25 years ago in the intelligence forces. There's no way, in my view, that Israel did not know of what's coming. A cat moving alongside the fence is triggering all forces. So what happened to the strongest army in the world? How come border crossings were wide open? Something is very wrong here. Something is very strange. This chain of events is very unusual and not typical for the Israeli defense system.
Now I'm going to play something that Charlie Kirk said before speaking publicly before his death. And his words echo what a lot of us, millions of us, were thinking deep inside anyway. Have a listen to him.
I've been to Israel many times. The whole country's a fortress. When I first heard this story, I still had the same gut instinct that I did initially. I find this very hard to believe. I've been to that Gaza border. You cannot go 10 feet without running into a 19-year-old with an AR-15 or an automatic machine gun that is an IDF soldier. Right? The whole country is surveilled. And so let me just kind of go through this. We don't talk about Israeli politics very often, and most Americans don't know this. The last 9 months, Israel was on the brink of civil war. It's not an exaggeration. This judicial stuff, there were hundreds of thousands of Israelis taking to the streets because Bibi Netanyahu was basically redefining the Israeli constitution. That's not an exaggeration.
And now let's get back to Efrat Fenigson, and you'll see how much of it resonates again with what Charlie Kirk was saying.
Point about the situation in Israel in the past few years, which I want to make, is related to, and those who follow me know that there's a general sense of insecurity in Israel. There's political and social instability and unrest. Public funds are being misused on agendas such as COVID, climate, judicial reform, abolishing cash, and many more. The current government is highly corrupt in my view, while the previous one was no better. I don't care about having a popular opinion. I care about exposing evil forces wherever and whomever they are. So to me, this surprise attack seems like a planned operation on all fronts. This is a failure to protect the people of Israel, for sure. Perhaps the biggest failure since the Yom Kippur War exactly 50 years ago, if not bigger. By the way, is it a coincidence it's exactly 50 years ago, almost on the day? The Yom Kippur War was on October 6, 1973. If I was a conspiracy theorist, I would say that this feels like the work of the deep state. It feels like the people of Israel and the people of Palestine have been sold once again to the higher powers that be. At the same time, this is still very, very difficult to fathom.
Both of them are saying out loud what millions of people around the world have been thinking. How on earth could the most secure, surveilled, and technologically monitored border on the planet simply fail the way it did on October 7th? For many of us, the best explanation is catastrophic negligence. For others, it looks like something far darker. The Israeli authorities knew what Hamas were planning and allowed it to happen because it gave them the pretext they needed to then destroy Gaza and carry out ethnic cleansing. For many observers, October the 7th provided the pretext to finally solve what Israel has long framed as the Gaza problem. What to do with the Gazans, how to remove them, and how to take their land, while maintaining a degree of international legitimacy. After all, they were simply defending themselves after October the 7th. And with the emotive language that followed October the 7th, claims of 40 beheaded babies and systematic mass rape, which, by the way, these claims were never substantiated and later quietly walked back, the public was pushed into now increasingly recognized as a genocide campaign. The public was pushed to back what is now increasingly recognized as a genocidal campaign. Do you remember the words of Jordan Peterson? Give him hell. And to a large degree, that strategy worked, although many of us could see through the lies. And this is not to say that Israelis did not die. They did. But there is a long and uncomfortable history, not just in Israel, but across many states and governments, of governments allowing their own people to die or actively killing them to achieve strategic objectives. We know that Egypt warned Israel in advance about the attacks more than once. We know that Israel transferred large sums of money to Hamas over the years, officially framed as a way of managing Gaza. We know that roughly 2/3 of IDF troops were moved away from Gaza border shortly beforehand. We know that the Hannibal Directive was invoked, allowing Israeli forces to kill their own citizens to prevent hostage taking. We know there is testimony that Apache helicopters fired into areas where Israeli civilians were present. We know border surveillance footage was deleted or is missing. And as already mentioned, the beheaded babies and mass rape narrative was never confirmed and has since collapsed. So the damage has been done. So when you strip away the slogans, the outrage, bait, and the emotional manipulation, I would argue this. If you genuinely care about Jewish people and if you care about Israel, then as a friend, you would want to ask these questions and have them investigated properly. Because if a state is harming its own people or allowing them to be harmed, that is not unprecedented. And it is not a state acting in the interests of its citizens. After all, this is a government that aggressively enforced COVID injections on its population and punished dissent. This is not a government with a strong record of respecting consent. So I want to strip away the slogans, the outrage bait, and the talking points, and look carefully at what is now being proposed, who is proposing it, and what kind of future it locks in. And before I do that, it's also very important to realize that Israel is not some homogenous state. Actually, prior to October the 7th, as you've heard from Efrat Fenixson and Charlie Kirk, there are huge upheavals going on in Israeli society. And people were not happy with Netanyahu. That man is clutching to the strings of power, and he's a desperate man who will do desperate things. Now, when you stop looking at all the emotive narrative and strip away the propaganda and brainwashing, the picture that emerges is not one of peace, reconstruction, or healing. What's been unveiled in Davos is a picture of administration without consent, without a mandate, development without sovereignty, and profit without accountability. Gaza is not being rebuilt, it is being redesigned. And it's being used as a prototype and a template for all of us. Just as the destruction of Gaza was a testbed for AI, assisted targeting, autonomous weapons, drone technology, and new surveillance-driven warfare, the reconstruction phase is now being used as a prototype for how populations will be governed in the future. Surveilled 24/7, tracked, monitored, traced. Palantir was involved in the destructive phase, supplying the data infrastructure that enabled targeting, surveillance, and real-time decision-making. And now, as Gaza is reduced to rubble, the technocrats are lining up to manage the reconstruction. The Board of Peace, not a peace process, but a governance architecture. It sounds like a company, the board. And it is. The so-called Board of Peace is being presented as a post-conflict stabilization body. But if you read its charter carefully, and you'll find it at the bottom of my Substack, it does not even mention Gaza. Yes, let that sink in for a second. The very charter for the Board of Peace, which is being set up to run and administer Gaza, does not actually mention Gaza. It does not function like a peace process at all. It does not negotiate between parties. It does not center affected populations. It does not guarantee political rights. Instead, it establishes a permanent governance architecture with legal personality, immunity, executive authority, and financial control. Like I said, the Board of Peace Charter notably does not mention Gaza anywhere, and I think that's really worth repeating. It's so shocking. This matters. It means that this body is not tied to one place or one conflict. You see, it's portable, deployable anywhere instability is declared by powerful actors. Although legitimacy is claimed via the United Nations Security Council, with China and Russia abstaining, the Charter itself outlives any specific mandate. The Gaza timeframe becomes temporary, but the governance structure does not. This is not reconstruction oversight. It's a new layer of rule. Governance without the governed. And membership in the Board of Peace is restricted to states invited by the chairman. There's no mechanism for representation of ordinary Gazans. There are no elections. There is no referendum. There is no consultation process. The average Gazan Palestinian has no say, no voice. Palestinians are not members, not even observers or even stakeholders in this process. This is governance being imposed from above, not derived from the people, not from below. And again, this is not a flaw, it is the design. The system is designed like this, and the system is doing what it was designed to do. So let's look at who's actually on this board. A roll call of power without conscience. I mean, honestly, the so-called Gaza Peace Board reads less like a peace initiative and more like a roll call of power without conscience, a list of dictators and tyrants. If you think I'm kidding, I'm not. Well, first of all, you have Benjamin Netanyahu, an indicted war criminal under international scrutiny. Alongside him sits Mohammed bin Salman, a ruler whose critics are silenced, imprisoned, dismembered, or worse. Then Mohammed bin Zayed, head of state, implicated in fueling war and mass killing in Sudan through proxy forces and arms flows. Add in Alexander Lukashenko, often described as Europe's last open dictator. Then you throw in Ilham Aliyev, responsible ethnic cleansing against Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. Include Shavkat Mirziyoyev, largely unknown to the public, but presiding over a state with a long record of torture, repression, and tightly controlled political life. Then there is Jared Kushner, a property developer, openly salivating over a future Gaza Riviera, while the rubble is still warm and the blood has not yet congealed. And finally, let's talk about Tony Blair, a man whose legacy includes the deaths of over 1 million Iraqis and the permanent destabilization of an entire region. A man who quite literally has blood on his hands and has openly supported Israel throughout his career. If this is what the architects of peace look like, one really has to ask whether peace is even the objective. You could hardly assemble a more ragtag, grotesque collection of figures to sit in judgment over Gaza. Unless the point is not peace at all, but power, profit, and narrative control, dressed up in diplomatic language. Representation, alignment, and the illusion of neutrality. These men in suits don't fool me. Anybody claiming to oversee peace, reconstruction, and governance in a post-conflict territory must meet a basic standard. It must be, and it must be seen to be, politically neutral, representative, and free from conflicts of interest. But again, the Board of Peace fails that test. So let's see this board. Why is it they're all drawn from one political worldview? Several of the prominent figures associated with the Board of Peace or its surrounding ecosystem have openly declared strong personal, political, or financial alignment with Israel, or have long-standing roles advancing Israeli interests. This includes figures such as the ones I've just mentioned, Jared Kushner, architect of the Abraham Accords, publicly aligned with Israeli strategic interests and closely embedded in Israeli political circles. Steve Witkoff, a real estate investor with close ties to Israeli leadership and public expressions of support for Israel. Tony Blair, whose post-premiership work in the Middle East has consistently aligned with Western and Israeli security frameworks, and whose Middle East quartet role was widely criticized by Palestinians. Then there's Mark Rowan, a major financier with public pro-Israeli advocacy and deep ties to Israeli economic interests. And then Robert Gabriel, associated with investment networks that have expressed explicit political sympathy with Israel. These affiliations matter, not because of religion, not because of ethnicity, because they represent a very narrow and consistent political alignment in a conflict where neutrality is essential. Now I ask the obvious question: where is the Palestinian representation? For example, how many Palestinians sit on the Board of Peace Executive Board? How many representatives of Gaza's civil society, or professional class, or municipal leadership, or displaced population are present on the board, the executive board? How many voices directly accountable to Palestinian communities are involved in decision making? The answer is simple: none. No Palestinian representation, no Palestinian voting rights, no Palestinian veto, no Palestinian consent mechanism. The very people whose land, homes, resources, and political future are being decided are not even in the room. This is governance without consent, which is not peace. This is not a symbolic omission. It is the very defining feature of the entire structure. Decisions about Gaza are being made by political elites, financial actors, foreign governments, technocratic administrators, and people that Palestinians would argue are hostile to Palestinians themselves. This is governance about Palestinians for investors, but without Palestinians. This is not peace building, it is administration. And hear my words. This is going to be the future that will be played out for the rest of us on this planet. Gaza is the testbed. To be absolutely clear, this is not a criticism of Jewish people. It is not a religious argument. It is not an ethnic argument. It is a critique of power alignment and exclusion. Peace without representation is occupation by another name. And this may sound uncomfortable for some, but I genuinely believe that Jewish people and Israeli people are also victims, though in a different way than the Palestinians. What's really interesting in the Charter, there is one clause that removes any ambiguity that capital is the political power at play here. You see, member states serve fixed terms unless they contribute over $1 billion, in which case term limits do not apply. Is this not some form of bribery? This isn't diplomacy. This is a shareholder model of governance. Influence is being purchased. Permanence is being purchased. Peace becomes a financial instrument. And where will this money go? The chairman controls the memberships, appointments, renewals, vetoes, dispute interpretation, succession, and dissolution. And who is the inaugural chairman of this board? Why? Donald Trump, of course. Himself a lifelong property developer. There will be no independent court, no appeal mechanism, no democratic oversight. I ask you this. Does this not effectively make Donald Trump a king? If you ask me, law is non-existent here. It has just collapsed into the authority. And let's get back to Davos, where all of this was being pitched. Gaza literally was being pitched as an asset and a property deal. Jared Kushner, standing on the stage in Davos with his fancy slides, presented what was framed as a vision for Gaza's future. But you should try and find a video of him talking and listen carefully to how it was framed. It wasn't framed as restitution, not as repair, not as justice. It was framed honestly as an opportunity, an investment, and growth. You had slides, renderings, master plans, because this was not a peace proposal. It was a property development pitch. And quite slick as well. And developers are not neutral actors. Context also matters. Jared Kushner comes from real estate. His family business is property development. His father, Charles Kushner, a major developer, was convicted of serious financial crimes and later pardoned by Donald Trump. Donald Trump is Jared Kushner's father-in-law, and he's built his public identity in luxury real estate. Both these fellows are developers, and they see land as potential, destruction as clearance, stability as investability. That mindset saturates this proposal, and frankly, it's quite sickening. And then there's a slide that exposes the economic model. There was one slide presented at Davos, which is titled "Empowering Gazans with Jobs, Training and Services." Sounds wonderful, doesn't it? So does safe and effective. In this slide, it promises the following outcomes after 10 years, so by 2035. The slide promised over $10 billion in GDP, over 500,000 jobs, over $25 billion in utilities and infrastructure investment, the same ones bombed to smithereens by Israel, by the way. Over $3 billion in commercial zones, tourism corridors, energy and digital infrastructure. And then crucially, $13,000 for every average income, annual income for every household. This was not a floor, it was the target, it was the ceiling. Why do these numbers matter? Because household income is not the same as individual income. And in Gaza, households are large and multi-generational, spread across multiple adults and children. $13,000 by 2035 is honestly subsistence living. It's a joke. This isn't prosperity, especially in the so-called fancy, gleaming, high-towered modern city that they're going to be developing. This is, this is enslavement. And this is their best case scenario. So after 10 years of peace, stability and redevelopment, that's what's being offered. And compared to that, what is actually being monetized? Prime Mediterranean coastline, as we keep getting reminded by Jared and Trump and others. Commercial districts, tourism revenue, energy infrastructure. Billions and billions in offshore oil and gas that belongs to the Palestinian people in Gaza. Possibly they might even be making the Ben Gurion Canal. This is structural inequality by design. And nowhere in the Davos materials or the Board of Peace Charter is there any discussion of Palestinian ownership of land, housing, utilities, commercial districts, offshore gas, or financial institutions. The presentations were slick, I'll give them that. The model is clear. Palestinians will work and others will own. Who are the others? Jobs will replace rights. Training replaces sovereignty. This isn't empowerment. It's management. This is modern slavery. And for all its details, the Board of Peace proposal avoids the most important questions. How exactly is Gaza going to be demilitarized? It's assumed, but not explained. There's no credible, rights-based plan for disarmament, reconciliation, or civil protection. Palestinians have a long and bitter history of disarmament, and that history ended in the Nakba. Security is treated as a precondition, not a negotiated outcome. And where will all the Gazans live during this reconstruction? Right now, many are living in tents on beaches or in the open air. Rebuilding Gaza will take years, likely decades. There's no clear plan for interim housing, no clear right of return, and no guarantees that temporary displacement will not become permanent. And as we know from history, temporary displacement is how permanent removal happens. Just look at how many millions of Palestinians to this day have been denied their right of return, living in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and elsewhere. And have Gazans even accepted this plan? There's no evidence of any consent. There's no referendum. There's no representative process. There's no democratic mandate. Decisions are being made in Davos, in Washington, and behind closed doors, not in Gaza. Again, this is governance without consent. This is not democracy. And then there is the $70 billion question. A joint estimate by the United Nations, the European Union, and the World Bank places the cost of rebuilding Gaza at around $70 billion. Who is going to pay for this? If governments fund it, who owns what is built? If loans fund it, who carries the debt? If private capital funds it, who's going to receive the returns? The answer is implicit. Investors profit, contractors profit, financial institutions profit, and Palestinians, for building this new world, well, they'll receive a paltry subsistence wage. They'll first build and then service the new economy. They will be slaves. And then there's the airport that's already been destroyed. Jared Kushner speaks of building a new airport in his slick and polished presentations. So what he omitted to say was that Gaza already had one. It opened in 1998, and it was then destroyed by Israel in the early 2000s. Infrastructure is not being restored, it's being replaced, without acknowledgement, without restitution, without consent. So now I want to talk to you about the Bantustan comparison. For those of you who don't know, under apartheid South Africa, Bantustans were presented as self-governing homelands. But in reality, they served 5 functions. They stripped away political rights. You see, citizenship was reassigned to powerless territories. And then there was containment. The borders of these areas were sealed and movement was controlled. And then you had the economic extraction. Labor stayed local, people couldn't move, and wealth flowed outward. All the resources were drained. And then you got development as pacification. So you gave the inhabitants of these regions jobs and housing, but that just simply masked the removal of power. They had no voice. They had no say. International legitimization. So recognition came from the elites, from the big power brokers, not the inhabitants. This is the same structure that's being proposed for Gaza. From racial apartheid to technocratic apartheid. That's what we are witnessing. And this is not apartheid of race alone. It is an apartheid of power. 2 populations, 1 territory, radically unequal control. One will govern, one will serve. And there will be containment without occupation. Gaza remains border controlled, its airspace denied, its maritime access restricted, and digitally surveilled. The occupation becomes administrative rather than military. Containment replaces conquest. This architecture becomes whitewash. Mass displacement is reframed as redevelopment clearance. Ethnic cleansing becomes opportunity. Occupation becomes administration. Colonialism becomes peace. The buildings become the apology. Gaza is not being rebuilt. It is being replaced. Let us be clear about that. The old Gaza, the historic Gaza, the living Gaza is no longer here. The Board of Peace Charter, the Davos presentation, the economic projections, and the unanswered questions all describe a single project. This is not peace. This is not justice. This is not self-determination. It is the conversion of Gaza into a managed labor zone, governed by technocrats, monetized by investors, and inhabited by a population denied sovereignty, ownership, and voice. Gaza is not the endpoint. It is the prototype. For the longest time, I genuinely did not understand why people would stand by figures like Donald Trump, as if he is not the obvious globalist puppet that he is, just another actor on the stage like all the other politicians, bought and paid for. They're all in the same club, and we ain't in it. But then I realized what is fundamentally at play, and I wrote about this just the other day on my Substack. The lie of the least bad option. The idea that wisdom lies in choosing the sweeter poison because at least it's not as bitter as the other one. This is not discernment, it's resignation. And it is exactly the psychological trap that keeps people clinging to figures like Donald Trump. At least he is not as bad as the other option. The reality is that Trump is now overseeing the sanitization and whitewashing of ethnic cleansing and the genocide of the Palestinians in Gaza. He is not acting against the system. He is acting for it, for the same globalist technocratic power structure he claims to oppose. And here in the UK, we had Nigel Farage recommend Tony Blair the ghoul as, for the role of vaccine czar during the COVID pandemic. This is a man who has blood on his hands, who is a Fabian, who is a wolf in sheep's clothing, who has brought about so much destruction in the UK, whether it be private partnerships and PPIs, private partner initiatives, and funding the NHS, but indebting them chronically to corporations, or whether it be the influx of mass migration. This is Tony Blair's legacy. And the Reform Party's leader, Nigel Farage, was recommending him, someone who is not even within his own political sphere or party. That tells you the mindset of Nigel Farage. And now you have Trump appointing Tony Blair on the peace board. Don't you see? All these different actors are not so different. They're all in the same club. And this points to a deeper problem. When large sections of the population begin to lose faith in the political system, when they start to see the pantomime for what it is, the ruling parasite class responds in a very predictable way. It delivers charismatic populist leaders and then starts to offer token concessions. So you see, these concessions are never fundamental. They are expendable. For example, cultural battlegrounds, the trans agenda, wokeism, and symbolic policies are thrown under the bus to create the illusion of change. This creates the impression that there's a genuine war taking place between left and right, conservative and Labour, Democrats and Republicans, and that, you know what, your side is winning, and that your savior has arrived. The divergence is only superficial. The substance never, ever changes. The core agenda, which can be summed up, by the way, in Agenda 2030 and the sustainability goals, continues untouched. Technocracy, digital identity, digital currency, mRNA technology, communitarian governance, support for empire, regime change, and Israel. These are non-negotiable. These are the red lines. The fundamental reality is never exposed, that we do not live in a democracy in the West, but under an oligarchy, endlessly mythologized as freedom and hypocritically used to vilify and attack countries that attempt to forge an independent sovereign path. Like I said, the red lines remain firmly in place. What cannot be challenged is the crooked financial industrial complex, the banking class that has enslaved humanity through a debt-based Ponzi monetary system and the network of dependent structures it produces. The military industrial complex, the medical industrial complex, the pharmaceutical industrial complex, the political industrial complex, the lobbying industrial complex, the media industrial complex, the surveillance industrial complex, the data industrial complex, the prison industrial complex, the education industrial complex, and the tech industrial complex. When you strip everything back, the real divide is not left versus right. It is between the governed and those who govern us without our consent. Between the many and the parasite class. If the fact that Trump, being the father of the vaccine, did not convince you that he is not one of us, then surely the fact that he now sits at the head of the Board of Peace alongside war criminals should. Judge them by their fruits. Choosing Trump because he is not as bad as the other option is not resistance. It is participating in the same rigged game, just with a different costume. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Folks, he is not on Team Humanity and he is not our savior. So I'll end with my final thoughts. What we're seeing is not peace. It is order imposed for profit. It is violence laundered through development language. And if this model is allowed to stand, Gaza will not be the exception. It will be the blueprint. And when I say blueprint, I do not mean this metaphorically. The language, tools, and governance structures being trialed here, digital identity, managed mobility, algorithmic decision-making, public-private administration, labor without ownership, are the same ones being promoted globally under banners like smart cities and 15-minute cities and Agenda 21 sustainability goals. What is being tested in Gaza through force will later be offered elsewhere through incentives, compliance, and convenience. As I've said since October the 7th, to everyone who says, oh, I don't know, I don't want to get involved, I don't have an opinion about Gaza and Palestine, I don't know much about the conflict, it's very complicated. That's simply not good enough. Because what is happening to the Palestinians does affect us. It does involve us. And I don't mean just the fact that our governments are sending weapons and arms and logistical support and intelligence or even diplomatic cover to the Israeli government for what is happening. What is happening to the Palestinians is a test bed for what will happen to all of us. Their current predicament is our future predicament. And if we do not stand with the Palestinians today, there will be no one left to stand with us tomorrow. I, Ahmed Malik, am a private civilian protected by the Geneva Convention. My Substack, social media posts, and podcasts are my personal experiences, observations, and opinions. This information is for educational purposes only. Although I am a doctor, I am not your doctor, and I am not providing medical or legal advice to you or to the wider public. I am not licensed or registered with the GMC or any other licensing board. The responsibility for the interpretation, due diligence, and use of the information from my Substack and my podcast lies with you, the viewer and or listener. Please do your research and use your discernment. It is not my intention to harass, intimidate, offend, defame, conspire, blackmail, coerce, or cause anxiety, alarm, or distress to any man or woman, and the information presented here is done so with peaceful and honourable intentions. Enjoy, folks.